The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Captain Marcus Wellington adjusted his ceremonial sword for the third time. 22 years of service to the crown had taught him that routine was everything. But today, something felt different. The air carried an unusual tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Marcus stood at his post outside the main entrance to Buckingham Palace, his red tunic pristine and his black bearskin hat perfectly positioned. Tourists were already gathering behind the metal barriers, cameras ready to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony that would begin in 2 hours. The familiar sight should have been comforting, but today it made him uneasy. "Morning, Captain," called out Sergeant James Hartley, approaching with the morning briefing folder tucked under his arm. At 28, James was young for his rank, but his sharp eyes and quick thinking had earned him Marcus's respect years ago. "Intelligence reports are clean. No specific threats, but they're asking us to maintain elevated awareness." Marcus nodded, accepting the folder. The intelligence briefings had become increasingly cautious over the past months. The world seemed more unpredictable now, with threats emerging from unexpected corners. Social media had made it easier for troubled individuals to fixate on targets, and the royal family remained one of the most visible symbols in the world. "Any word on the new rotation schedule?" Marcus asked, scanning the overnight reports. 3 guards had called in sick with flu symptoms, leaving them slightly understaffed for the morning shift. "We're covering with overtime volunteers," James replied. Thompson and Davies agreed to extend their shifts. Mitchell's coming in early from the afternoon rotation. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Private Sarah Chen, one of the newer guards who had joined the unit 6 months earlier. Her enthusiasm remained undimmed by the long hours and rigid protocols that defined their service. She snapped to attention with military precision. "Sir, perimeter check complete. All barriers secure. Tourist areas clear of suspicious items. The Metropolitan Police have confirmed their plainclothes officers are in position throughout the crowd." Marcus appreciated Sarah's thoroughness. The coordination between the Palace Guard and the Metropolitan Police had improved significantly over the years, creating layers of security that most tourists never noticed. Plainclothes officers mingled with the crowds, behavioral analysts watched for unusual patterns, and armed response teams remained on standby just out of sight. As the morning progressed, the crowd grew larger. School groups arrived in chartered buses, their excited chatter adding to the atmosphere. Tour guides held up colored flags, gathering their groups while delivering well-rehearsed speeches about the history of the Guard. Street performers worked the edges of the crowd, playing music and entertaining children, while parents took photos. Marcus had seen this scene thousands of times, but his trained eyes continued scanning for anomalies. A man in a dark jacket who lingered too long in one spot. A woman with a large bag who seemed more interested in the building than the ceremony. A teenager whose nervous energy felt different from typical tourist excitement. Most of these observations led nowhere, but vigilance was the price of security. The first sign of trouble came at exactly 9:47 a.m., according to the incident report that would be filed later. A man in his early 30s, wearing a gray hoodie and dark jeans, approached the barrier line with unusual determination. Unlike the other tourists who maintained a respectful distance while taking photos, this individual seemed focused on getting as close as possible to the guard posts. Sergeant Hartley noticed him first. The man's movements were purposeful rather than casual, and his eyes kept darting toward the guards rather than taking in the general spectacle. He carried a small backpack and kept his hands in his pockets, which immediately raised concerns. "Captain," James said quietly, nodding toward the man. "Northeast barrier, gray hoodie." Marcus followed his gaze and immediately understood the concern. The man was now pressing against the barrier, trying to engage guard Mitchell in conversation. Mitchell maintained his stoic pose, as protocol demanded, but his subtle hand signals indicated he was aware of the situation. The Metropolitan Police plainclothes officers began moving closer, their casual tourist disguises allowing them to approach without alarming the genuine crowd members. PC Jennifer Walsh, posing as a mother with a stroller, positioned herself within 15 feet of the suspicious individual. Detective Constable Michael Barnes, dressed as a street artist, set up his easel with a clear view of the developing situation. The man's behavior became increasingly erratic. He began speaking loudly to guard Mitchell, asking personal questions about his family and making comments about the royal family that bordered on inappropriate. Other tourists started to notice, some moving away from the area, while others began filming with their phones. Marcus made the decision to approach. His presence often diffused tense situations simply through the authority his rank represented. As he walked toward the barrier, he noticed the man's agitation increasing. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air, and his hands were now clenched into fists inside his pockets. "Good morning," Marcus said in his most diplomatic tone. "I'm Captain Wellington. Is there something I can help you with today?" The man turned toward Marcus with wild eyes that seemed to be fighting some internal battle. Up close, Marcus could see the signs of sleep deprivation and possibly substance abuse. The man's pupils were dilated, and his breathing was rapid and shallow. "You don't understand," the man said, his voice carrying a desperate edge. "I need to tell them something important. The Queen needs to know what's happening. They won't listen to me, but they have to listen." Marcus recognized the signs of someone experiencing a mental health crisis. His training had covered these situations extensively, emphasizing de-escalation and the importance of treating such individuals with dignity while maintaining security. "I understand you feel you have important information," Marcus replied calmly. "There are proper channels for communicating with the palace. I can help you get in touch with the right people who can listen to what you have to say." The offer seemed to confuse the man rather than calm him. He looked around at the growing crowd, the cameras, and the obvious security presence with increasing paranoia. No, he muttered, shaking his head vigorously. "They're already watching. They know I'm here. This was supposed to be different. This was supposed to work." The plainclothes officers were now in position, ready to intervene if the situation escalated. PC Walsh had moved her stroller to block one potential escape route, while DC Barnes had abandoned his art supplies and was ready to move at a moment's notice. Marcus continued trying to establish a connection with the increasingly agitated man. "What's your name? I'd like to help you, but I need to understand what's troubling you." "Daniel," the man said after a moment's hesitation. "Daniel Morrison, and you can't help me. Nobody can help me. They've made sure of that." The paranoid delusions were becoming more apparent, but Marcus knew that dismissing them would only make the situation worse. People experiencing these episodes needed to feel heard, even when their perceptions were distorted by mental illness. "Daniel, I want to understand what's happening," Marcus said, "but I need you to stay calm so we can talk properly. Can you take a step back from the barrier? Give yourself some space to breathe?" For a moment, it seemed like Daniel might comply. He looked at Marcus with a flicker of hope, as if recognizing a lifeline being offered. But then his expression changed, hardening with sudden resolve. "No," he said firmly. "No more talking. No more waiting. They need to see. Everyone needs to see what happens when they ignore people like me." The word sent a chill down Marcus's spine. In his experience, when someone shifted from seeking help to making declarations about showing people something, the situation was about to become dangerous. Daniel's right hand emerged from his pocket, revealing a hunting knife with a 6-inch blade that glinted in the morning sunlight. Screams erupted from the crowd as tourists realized what was happening. Parents grabbed their children, pulling them away from the barrier as chaos began to spread through the courtyard. The transformation from a peaceful morning ceremony to a security crisis happened in seconds. Marcus's training kicked in immediately, his mind shifting from diplomatic mode to tactical assessment. The knife was real. Daniel was clearly unstable, and there were hundreds of innocent people in the immediate area. "Armed individual northeast barrier," Marcus called out, his voice carrying clearly over the crowd noise. The code phrase would alert all security personnel to the nature of the threat while avoiding words that might further panic the civilians. Guard Mitchell, despite his ceremonial role, was also a trained soldier. Without breaking his formal stance, he began moving to put distance between himself and Daniel while maintaining visual contact. His hand moved to his radio, quietly confirming the alert and requesting immediate armed response. Daniel seemed surprised by the swift reaction to his revealed weapon. Perhaps he had expected more time to make whatever statement he was planning, or maybe the reality of his actions was finally sinking in. He stood frozen for a crucial moment, the knife held at his side while his eyes darted between the guards and the fleeing crowd. PC Walsh was the first to move, abandoning her stroller and approaching from Daniel's blind spot. Her police training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation, but the ceremonial setting and the presence of so many civilians added layers of complexity to what should have been a straightforward arrest procedure. "Daniel," Marcus continued, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system, "you've shown us the knife. We understand you're serious about whatever message you want to deliver. But hurting people won't help anyone listen to you. It will only make things worse." The logical part of Daniel's mind seemed to be warring with whatever delusions were driving his actions. He looked down at the knife in his hand as if surprised to find it there, then back at Marcus with confusion clouding his features. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," he mumbled, more to himself than to anyone else. "In my head it was different. It made sense. Everyone would understand." The moment of doubt gave PC Walsh the opening she needed. Moving with practiced efficiency, she closed the distance between herself and Daniel while he was distracted by his internal struggle. Her approach was silent, professional, and perfectly timed, but Daniel's peripheral vision caught her movement at the last second. His head snapped toward her, and the momentary confusion was replaced by panic. Without thinking, he spun toward the nearest target, which happened to be Guard Mitchell, who was still maintaining his ceremonial position despite the clear danger. The knife arced through the air in a wild, desperate swing that had more to do with panic than any planned attack. Mitchell, trained in close-quarters combat despite his ceremonial role, reacted with lightning reflexes that would determine whether this incident ended as a minor security breach or a national tragedy. Time seemed to slow as Daniel Morrison's knife cut through the morning air toward Guard Mitchell. The blade caught the sunlight, creating a brief flash that several tourists would later describe in their witness statements. Mitchell's years of military training compressed into split-second decision-making as his body moved before his mind fully processed what was happening. Mitchell's left arm came up in a defensive block while his right hand reached for his ceremonial sword. The knife connected with his forearm, slicing through the heavy wool of his red tunic and finding flesh beneath. The pain was sharp and immediate, but his adrenaline masked the worst of it as he focused on neutralizing the threat. The attack was clumsy, driven more by desperation than skill. Daniel had clearly never used a knife in combat before, and his wild swing left him off balance and exposed. Mitchell's counterattack was textbook perfect, a precise elbow strike to Daniel's solar plexus that doubled him over while simultaneously grabbing for the knife hand. PC Walsh arrived a split second later, her police baton already extended. She struck Daniel's knife hand with controlled force, targeting the pressure points that would force him to release the weapon without causing permanent damage. The knife clattered to the cobblestones with a metallic ring that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence that had fallen over the immediate area. Captain Marcus was already moving, his ceremonial sword drawn not for show, but as a functional weapon. His approach was measured and professional, creating a triangle formation with Mitchell and Walsh that gave Daniel no escape route, while ensuring clear lines of action for each responder. Daniel collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath from Mitchell's strike while cradling his injured hand. The knife lay 3 feet away, its blade now stained with Mitchell's blood. For a moment, everyone froze in tableau, the attackers, the guards, and the crowd of tourists who were still processing what they had just witnessed. "Secure the weapon," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. Walsh immediately moved to collect the knife while maintaining visual contact with Daniel, who was showing no signs of continued resistance but remained unpredictable. Mitchell examined his wound with the calm professionalism that marked veteran soldiers. The cut was approximately 4 inches long and moderately deep, bleeding freely but not life-threatening. His training had taught him to assess injuries quickly and accurately. This would require medical attention but wouldn't prevent him from continuing to function in the immediate crisis. Medic to northeast barrier, guard injured, suspect secured. Walsh spoke into her radio, using the tactical frequencies that connected all security personnel around the palace. The response would be immediate and comprehensive, with armed police, medical personnel, and incident commanders converging on their location within minutes. Daniel remained on his knees, his earlier aggression completely deflated. Tears streamed down his face as the reality of his actions began to penetrate whatever mental state had driven him to attack. He looked up at Mitchell with something approaching horror, as if seeing clearly for the first time what he had done. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words barely audible above the crowd noise. "I didn't mean, I wasn't supposed to. Oh, God, what have I done?" The transformation was remarkable and troubling. The man who had been determined to make some violent statement now seemed genuinely shocked by his own actions. It was a pattern Marcus had seen before in individuals experiencing severe mental health episodes, moments of clarity breaking through delusions like sunlight through storm clouds. Detective Constable Barnes arrived with backup officers from the Metropolitan Police, their approach coordinated and professional. The area was quickly secured with additional barriers to push the crowd back while preserving the crime scene for forensic examination. "Daniel Morrison," Walsh said as she began the arrest procedure, "I'm arresting you for assault with a deadly weapon and threatening behavior. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court." The formal words of the caution seemed to trigger another shift in Daniel's mental state. His tears stopped, and his expression became vacant, as if he was retreating into some internal space where the consequences of his actions couldn't reach him. Armed response unit officers took positions around the perimeter, their presence both reassuring and sobering. These were the same officers who had responded to terrorist incidents across London, trained to end threats with lethal force if necessary. Their measured deployment spoke to the seriousness with which any attack on the Royal Guards was treated. Sarah Ahmed, the palace's senior medical officer, arrived with her emergency kit and immediately began examining Mitchell's wound. Her assessment was swift and thorough, cleaning the injury and applying temporary dressing while evaluating whether immediate hospital transport was necessary. "Clean cut, no major blood vessels damaged," she reported to Marcus. "Needs stitching but can wait for proper facilities. No signs of nerve damage or complications." Her calm professionalism helped maintain the controlled atmosphere that was essential for managing the broader situation. The crowd of tourists had been pushed back behind secondary barriers, but many were still recording the aftermath with their phones. The incident would be on social media within minutes and likely trending globally within the hour. Managing the narrative would become crucial to preventing copycat incidents or international concerns about security around the royal family. Marcus made the difficult decision to continue with a modified version of the changing of the guard ceremony. Canceling would suggest that security had been compromised and might encourage other troubled individuals to attempt similar disruptions. The show of normalcy, even with obvious security modifications, would send a message of resilience and professional competence. "Sergeant Hartley," Marcus called out, "coordinate with the tourism police for crowd management. We'll proceed with the ceremony in 30 minutes, modified formation to account for the incident site." James nodded, understanding immediately what was required. The ceremony could be adapted to work around the crime scene area while maintaining its essential character. Tourist safety remained paramount, but projecting strength and continuity was equally important. Daniel was placed in restraints and helped to his feet by the arresting officers. His compliance was complete now, almost mechanical, as if the fight had gone out of him entirely. He would be transported to a secure medical facility where mental health professionals could evaluate his condition before formal charges were filed. The investigation began immediately at the scene. Detective Inspector Caroline Fletcher, who specialized in crimes against public figures, arrived to oversee the evidence collection and witness interviews. Her team would need to determine whether Daniel had acted alone or as part of any larger conspiracy. "Any known associates?" Fletcher asked Walsh while crime scene technicians photographed the knife and blood evidence. "Nothing yet," Walsh replied, consulting her preliminary notes. He mentioned feeling ignored and watched, classic paranoid ideation. "First impression is lone wolf with significant mental health issues, but will run full background checks." The efficiency of the response was remarkable to observe. Within 20 minutes of the initial attack, medical care had been provided, the suspect was in custody, evidence was being collected, witness statements were being taken, and security protocols were being adjusted for the continued ceremony. It demonstrated the levels of preparation and training that protected high-profile targets in an increasingly unpredictable world. Mitchell, despite his injury, insisted on remaining on duty for the ceremony. "It's just a cut," he argued when Dr. Ahmed suggested he go to hospital immediately. "If I leave now, it gives him the victory he was looking for. The uniform stays. The duty continues." His determination was admirable but also concerning from a medical perspective. Ahmed compromised by applying a more substantial dressing and requiring Mitchell to have a partner guard stay within arm's reach throughout the ceremony. Pride and professionalism were important, but no ceremony was worth risking a guard's health. The tourists who had witnessed the attack were a mix of shaken and fascinated. Many had never seen violence up close, and the speed with which it had occurred and been resolved left them struggling to process what they had experienced. Victim support officers from the Metropolitan Police began the careful work of taking statements while providing emotional support where needed. "It happened so fast," explained Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, a retired teacher from Manchester who had been visiting with her grandson. "One minute everything was normal, people taking pictures and having a lovely time. Then suddenly there was screaming and that poor guard was bleeding. I've never seen anything like it." Her grandson, 12-year-old Tommy, had a different perspective, like action heroes but real. The way they moved, it was like they'd practiced it 1,000 times. The range of reactions would be important for the subsequent investigation and for understanding how such incidents affected public confidence in security arrangements. Children often process traumatic events differently than adults, and their observations could provide unique insights into what had actually occurred. Detective Inspector Fletcher began reviewing the security camera footage that had captured the entire incident from multiple angles. The images were clear enough to document every second of Daniel's approach, the revelation of the weapon, the attack itself, and the immediate response. This footage would become crucial evidence in any legal proceedings. "Textbook response," she murmured to herself while watching the replay. "Could be used as training material for how to handle this type of situation." The professional competence on display was indeed remarkable. From the initial identification of unusual behavior through the final restraint of the suspect, every action had been appropriate and effective. It was the result of countless hours of training, regular drills, and the kind of institutional knowledge that developed over decades of protecting high-value targets. As the immediate crisis passed, attention turned to the broader implications of the attack. Security protocols would need to be reviewed, not because they had failed, but because every incident provided opportunities for improvement. The balance between public access and security would be reassessed, and new measures might be implemented to prevent similar occurrences. The incident would also trigger a comprehensive review of how individuals with mental health issues came into contact with high-security environments. Daniel's background would be thoroughly investigated to understand what warning signs might have been missed, and what support systems might have prevented his breakdown from reaching this point. For now, though, the immediate priorities were clear. Ensure Mitchell received proper medical care, complete the evidence collection, manage the public relations aspects of the incident, and prepare for the modified ceremony that would demonstrate that the attack had not achieved its apparent goal of disrupting the normal operations of the palace. The modified changing of the guard ceremony proceeded with military precision, though the atmosphere remained charged with tension. Captain Marcus Wellington positioned himself strategically to oversee both the ceremonial duties and the ongoing investigation, his experienced eye-catching details that others might miss. Guard Mitchell stood at his post with his arm properly bandaged beneath his red tunic, his pale complexion the only outward sign of the morning's trauma. Ahmed had administered a local anesthetic and applied butterfly closures to keep the wound sealed until proper surgical stitching could be performed later. His insistence on completing his duty had impressed everyone present, but Marcus knew that processing the psychological impact of being attacked would take longer than healing the physical injury. The crowd that gathered for the ceremony was different from the usual tourist audience. Word of the incident had spread rapidly through social media, drawing curious onlookers who hoped to see some remnant of the drama that had unfolded earlier. News crews had begun arriving, their cameras focused as much on the crime scene tape that still marked the attack location as on the ceremonial proceedings. Detective Inspector Caroline Fletcher continued her methodical investigation, interviewing witnesses while the scene remained fresh in their memories. The accounts were remarkably consistent, painting a picture of professional guards responding to an unpredictable threat with textbook efficiency. "The big guard, the captain, he never lost his cool," explained Carlos Mendez, a tourist from Spain who had been filming the entire incident. "Even when the knife came out, he was talking to the man like a teacher with a troubled student. Very impressive, very human." Mrs. Elizabeth Chen, visiting from Hong Kong with her family, offered a different perspective. "I was terrified, but watching those guards work together was beautiful in a strange way. Like a dance they had rehearsed many times. My daughter asked if they were actors. The response was so perfectly coordinated." The investigation team was particularly interested in Daniel Morrison's behavior in the hours and days leading up to the attack. His social media accounts revealed a troubling pattern of escalating paranoia and fixation on what he perceived as governmental indifference to his personal struggles. Classic pathway to lone wolf violence, explained Dr. James Harrison, a forensic psychologist who had been called in to evaluate the case. Social isolation, paranoid ideation, fixation on symbolic targets, and a precipitating event that pushes them over the edge. The attack itself was probably impulsive rather than carefully planned. Daniel's apartment, which was being searched by warrant, contained journals filled with increasingly erratic entries dating back several months. The writings revealed a man struggling with unemployment, depression, and what appeared to be untreated mental illness. His fixation on the royal family had begun as admiration, but gradually transformed into a belief that they were somehow responsible for his personal difficulties. Day 127, still no response to my letters. They think they're too important to acknowledge real people with real problems. Day 143. Saw them on TV laughing while people like me suffer. How can they sleep at night? Day 156. Maybe they need to see what their indifference causes. Maybe then they'll understand. The progression documented in his journals painted a heartbreaking picture of a man whose mental health had deteriorated while he remained isolated from family, friends, and professional support systems. His last entry, written the night before the attack, was particularly chilling. Tomorrow they'll see. Tomorrow everyone will understand what happens when you ignore someone until they have nothing left to lose. Back at the palace, the ceremony concluded without further incident, but the impact on the guards was evident. Sergeant James Hartley noticed subtle changes in how his colleagues scanned the crowd. Their hypervigilance increased by the morning's reminder that threats could emerge from anywhere. "How's Mitchell holding up?" Marcus asked privately as they supervised the post-ceremony security sweep. "Physically, he's fine. Mentally, he's processing," James replied. "He keeps saying he should have seen it coming earlier, should have recognized the signs." Survivor's guilt mixed with professional pride. The phenomenon was common among security personnel who experienced attacks. Even when they responded perfectly, they often focused on what they might have done differently to prevent the incident entirely. It was a perfectionist mindset that made them excellent at their jobs, but sometimes harsh on themselves when violence occurred despite their best efforts. Dr. Ahmed returned from the hospital where she had accompanied Mitchell for proper medical treatment. 16 stitches, no complications expected, she reported. He'll be on light duty for a week, desk work only until the wound heals properly. And I've recommended he speak with the department psychologist. The psychological support protocols for guards who experienced violence had evolved significantly over the years. Early intervention and professional counseling had proven effective in preventing long-term trauma responses that could affect job performance or personal well-being. Media interest in the story was intense but manageable. The palace press office had issued a carefully worded statement emphasizing the professional response of the guards while expressing sympathy for Daniel Morrison's apparent mental health struggles. The narrative being crafted focused on the human elements of the story rather than sensationalizing the violence. Guard Mitchell's courage and professionalism exemplify the finest traditions of the Royal Guard, the statement read. We are also mindful that this incident appears to involve an individual struggling with serious personal challenges, and we hope he receives the support and treatment he needs. The delicate balance between security concerns and public sympathy required careful navigation. Too much focus on security might make the palace seem like a fortress under siege. Too much sympathy for the attacker might encourage copycat incidents. The goal was to project both strength and compassion. Detective Inspector Fletcher's preliminary findings suggested that Daniel Morrison had acted entirely alone. His financial record showed no unusual transactions, his phone contained no concerning communications with others, and his social isolation appeared genuine rather than calculated. The attack seemed to be the result of untreated mental illness rather than any organized conspiracy. We're looking at a textbook case of someone who fell through the cracks, Fletcher explained to her supervisors. Mental health services are stretched thin, and people like Morrison often don't seek help until it's too late. He probably represents more of a public health failure than a security failure. The broader implications of the incident were already being discussed in government circles. Questions were raised about how to better identify and support individuals who might pose risks to themselves or others before their situations deteriorated to the point of violence. Minister of State for Security Patricia Williams called for a review of mental health screening procedures and support systems, particularly for individuals who had been identified as having fixations on public figures or government institutions. "We cannot arrest people for having troubling thoughts," she explained in a confidential briefing. "But we must do better at connecting them with appropriate support before those thoughts become violent actions." The challenge was complex, involving privacy rights, resource allocation, and the fundamental difficulty of predicting human behavior. Mental health professionals estimated that for every individual who acted on violent thoughts, hundreds or thousands struggled with similar ideation but never crossed the line into actual violence. At the palace, normal operations gradually resumed, but with heightened awareness of potential threats. The security protocols had worked exactly as designed, but the incident served as a reminder that vigilance required constant reinforcement and adaptation. Captain Marcus convened a debriefing session with all personnel who had been involved in the response. These sessions were crucial for maintaining operational effectiveness and identifying lessons that could be applied to future situations. "What did we do well?" he asked, beginning with positive reinforcement before moving to areas for improvement. "Communication was excellent," observed PC Walsh. "Everyone knew their role and executed without confusion or overlap." "Medical response was immediate and appropriate," added Sergeant Hartley. "Having Dr. Ahmed on site made a huge difference in treating Mitchell quickly. Crowd control could have been faster," Marcus noted constructively. "We managed the immediate threat well, but clearing civilians took longer than optimal. We should review our barrier protocols." The discussion continued for over an hour, covering every aspect of the response from initial threat identification through evidence collection. These debriefings were essential for maintaining the high standards that had made the Royal Guard one of the most respected security forces in the world. Guard Mitchell, despite his injury, participated in the session via video link from the hospital. His insights as the direct target of the attack were particularly valuable for understanding how the incident had unfolded from his perspective. "The approach felt wrong from the beginning," he explained. His body language was different from curious tourists. More focused, more intense. "I was already alert before Captain Marcus started moving toward him. The observation reinforced the importance of trusting intuitive threat assessment, even when dealing with seemingly harmless individuals. Years of experience had taught the guards to recognize subtle behavioral cues that preceded trouble. As evening approached, the investigation entered a new phase focused on understanding Daniel Morrison's background and mental state. Forensic psychologists would evaluate his journals, social media posts, and personal history to create a comprehensive profile that might help prevent similar incidents in the future. The immediate crisis had passed, but its reverberations would continue for weeks or months as investigators, policymakers, and security professionals worked to extract every possible lesson from the day's events. The attack had lasted less than 30 seconds, but its analysis would contribute to protecting public figures and ordinary citizens for years to come. 3 weeks after the attack, Daniel Morrison sat in a secure psychiatric facility, finally receiving the mental health treatment that might have prevented the entire incident. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, his assigned psychiatrist, had been working with him daily to understand the complex mix of depression, paranoia, and social isolation that had led to his breakdown. The voices weren't auditory hallucinations, Dr. Martinez explained to the legal team preparing for Daniel's case. They were his own internal narrative that had become so distorted by depression and paranoid thinking that he experienced them as external commands. Classic presentation of untreated major depression with psychotic features. Daniel's recovery was slow but encouraging. Proper medication had cleared much of the paranoid fog that had clouded his thinking, allowing him to see his actions with devastating clarity. The remorse he felt was genuine and profound, making him an active participant in understanding how his mental state had deteriorated so dramatically. "I kept writing letters to the Queen because I thought she would understand," he explained during one of his sessions. "In my mind, she was like a grandmother figure who would care about someone like me. When I never got responses, I started thinking there was some conspiracy to keep my letters from reaching her." The reality, of course, was much simpler. The Royal Mail delivered thousands of letters to the palace daily, most handled by staff members who sent polite acknowledgments but could not possibly arrange personal responses from members of the royal family. Daniel's letters had been logged, acknowledged, and filed according to standard procedures, but his deteriorating mental state had interpreted the formal responses as evidence of deliberate indifference. Back at Buckingham Palace, Guard Mitchell had returned to full duty after his wound healed completely. The physical scar was barely visible, hidden beneath his uniform, but the psychological impact had required more time and professional support to process fully. The hardest part wasn't the attack itself, he confided to the department psychologist during one of their sessions. It was realizing how quickly normal can become dangerous. I'd stood at that post thousands of times, thinking the biggest threat was tourists trying to take selfies with us. Now I see every approach differently. The heightened awareness was both a strength and a challenge. Mitchell's improved threat detection was valuable, but the constant vigilance was mentally exhausting. Learning to maintain appropriate caution without becoming paralyzed by suspicion required ongoing support and training. Captain Marcus had used the incident as a teaching moment throughout the Royal Guard organization. The response had been exemplary, but he wanted to ensure that the lessons learned were preserved and shared beyond just the immediate participants. What made the difference, he explained to a group of new recruits during their training, was that everyone understood their role and trusted their partners to fulfill theirs. PC Walsh knew we would handle crowd control while she secured the weapon. Dr. Ahmed knew we would maintain scene security while she provided medical care. That level of coordination doesn't happen by accident. The training programs had been enhanced based on the incident analysis. New scenarios now included situations involving individuals with apparent mental health issues, emphasizing de-escalation techniques while maintaining security readiness. The goal was to help guards distinguish between genuine threats and people who needed help more than enforcement. Detective Inspector Caroline Fletcher's investigation had concluded with a comprehensive report that would influence security protocols not just for the Royal Guard, but for protective services throughout the United Kingdom and allied nations. Her findings emphasized the importance of multi-layered security and the value of behavioral threat assessment. Morrison's attack was preventable, but not necessarily by security forces, her report concluded. The intervention needed to happen months earlier, through mental health services, social support systems, or family intervention. By the time he approached the palace, we were managing consequences rather than preventing causes. The report sparked important discussions about the intersection of public safety and mental health policy. Government officials began exploring ways to identify and support individuals whose mental health struggles might lead them toward violence, while respecting civil liberties and avoiding stigmatizing mental illness. Minister Patricia Williams announced a pilot program that would embed mental health professionals with protective security teams for major public events. The goal was not to diagnose or treat people in crowds, but to help security personnel recognize and appropriately respond to individuals who might be experiencing mental health crises. We want to intervene with support before we need to intervene with force, she explained to Parliament. The Morrison incident showed us that our security response was excellent, but our prevention systems had gaps that we need to address. The tourist experience at the palace had also evolved in response to the incident. Additional barriers had been installed to create more space between crowds and guard posts, but they were designed to look natural and welcoming rather than fortress-like. Behavioral detection officers now worked the crowds more systematically, trained to identify not just potential terrorists, but individuals who might be struggling with mental health issues. The changes were largely invisible to casual visitors, who continued to enjoy the ceremony and photo opportunities that made the changing of the guard one of London's most popular attractions. But security professionals from around the world studied the modifications as examples of how to enhance protection without compromising public access. Ard Mitchell had become an unofficial spokesperson for the incident, speaking at training conferences about the experience of being attacked and the importance of maintaining both vigilance and empathy when dealing with disturbed individuals. Daniel Morrison wasn't evil, he often told audiences. He was sick, and his sickness made him dangerous. Our job is to protect everyone, including people like him who might hurt themselves or others because they're not thinking clearly. Sometimes protection means stopping an attack. Sometimes it means getting someone the help they need before they become violent. His perspective had been shaped by visiting Daniel during his treatment, a meeting arranged by Dr. Martinez as part of both men's healing process. The conversation had been difficult but valuable for both participants. "I'm sorry," Daniel had said simply, tears streaming down his face. "I was so lost in my own head that I couldn't see you as a real person. You were just a symbol of everything I thought was wrong with the world." "I know," Mitchell had replied, And I'm glad you're getting better. That's what matters now. The exchange had helped both men process the incident and move forward with their lives. Daniel's recovery continued steadily, with plans for supervised community reintegration once his treatment was complete. Mitchell returned to duty with renewed purpose and a deeper understanding of the human elements in his protective role. Captain Marcus reflected on the incident during quiet moments at his post. In 22 years of service, he had dealt with many security challenges, but none had illustrated so clearly the complex intersection of duty, compassion, and professional judgment that defined modern protective work. The attack had lasted less than 30 seconds, but its implications would influence his approach to leadership for the remainder of his career. The perfect coordination of his team under pressure had validated years of training and preparation. More importantly, it had demonstrated that security could be maintained without losing the human element that made their service meaningful. 6 months after the incident, Daniel Morrison was granted supervised release to a halfway house where he would continue treatment while reintegrating into society. His case had become a model for how the justice system could balance accountability with mental health treatment, focusing on preventing future incidents rather than simply punishing past actions. The Royal Guard continued their duties with enhanced awareness but unchanged dedication. Tourists still gathered daily to witness the ceremony. Children still asked for photos with the guards, and the ancient traditions continued with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that protection and service remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago. The incident had reminded everyone involved that behind the ceremonial uniforms and historic traditions were real people doing a difficult job with skill, courage, and compassion. It was a lesson worth remembering for guards and civilians alike in an increasingly complex world where the line between security and service continues to evolve with each new challenge they face together.